They called themselves gods among men. For 300 years, the Vikings terrorized Europe like wolves hunting sheep. They sacked Paris, they besieged Constantinople, they made kings pay tribute just to stop the killing. But there was one place they absolutely refused to go. One coastline that made hardened Norse warriors wake up screaming in the middle of the night. Not because of another empire, not because of better weapons, but because of a tribe so brutal, so terrifying, that Vikings, the men who laughed at death, chose to sail 500 miles out of their way just to avoid them. I'm talking about the Baltic tribes, the Curonians, the Oeselians, names you've never heard. But in the 11th century, these people turned the Baltic Sea into a Viking graveyard. And the story of how they did it is absolutely insane. Stick around, because what I'm about to tell you will flip everything you thought you knew about Vikings. Let's go. So first, you need to understand how cocky the Vikings were by the year 1000. For 3 centuries, they'd owned the Baltic Sea, completely dominated it. Swedish kings looked east and saw one thing: a warehouse of slaves and treasure. Raiding the Baltic coast was routine, it was business, it was boring. They'd sail over, grab some people, burn a village, sail home. Easy money. The tribes living there, Curonians, Oeselians, Estonians, were seen as primitive, weak, victims. But here's what the Vikings missed. These tribes were watching, learning, adapting, and they were getting really, really good at killing Norsemen. At first, it was subtle. A Viking ship wouldn't come back. A Danish patrol vanished near an island. Swedish merchants blamed bad weather, bad luck, pirates. They didn't want to admit the truth. The barbarians were evolving. Because while Sweden celebrated in their meadvalls, something was happening across the Baltic. Hidden in the fjords and coastal forests, the Curonians were building ships. Not cheap knockoffs, revolutionary designs. Lighter, flat-bottomed, built specifically to hunt Viking longships in shallow water. They studied Norse tactics for decades. They knew exactly how Vikings fought, and now they were ready to turn the hunters into prey. Summer, 1187. A Swedish lookout on Gotland Island sees something weird on the horizon. Not the usual red and white Viking sails, dark sails, dozens of them, coming fast like a swarm of wasps. He doesn't sound the alarm because he can't process what he's seeing. By the time he realizes what's happening, it's too late. The Oeselians hit the anchored Swedish fleet like a hurricane. But they don't fight like Vikings. They don't want honorable combat. They use guerrilla naval warfare. They throw iron hooks onto Swedish ships, but instead of boarding, they hurl flaming torches. They throw pots filled with venomous snakes, quicklime that burns skin on contact. Panic on the Swedish decks is total. These are men who fought Saxons and Franks without blinking, but now they're jumping into the water in full armor, choosing to drown rather than face what's coming through the smoke. 60 Swedish warships, the pride of the fleet, reduced to burning wreckage in under an hour. But the real horror wasn't the killing. It was what happened to the survivors. Because the Baltic tribes had a reputation. They didn't take prisoners for ransom like civilized people. They took prisoners for their gods. Vikings feared dying without a sword in hand because it meant losing Valhalla, but they feared the Baltic tribes more. Because legends spoke of forest shrines where captured Vikings weren't enslaved, they were sacrificed. Baltic priests read the future in the guts of Swedish warriors. That psychological terror, knowing you wouldn't get a warrior's death, but would die screaming on a stone altar in a foreign forest, broke Viking morale faster than any sword. When news reached the Swedish capital, the king lost his mind. His fleet destroyed, his men sacrificed to pagan gods, his authority crumbling. King Knut Eriksson needed revenge fast, so he made the worst decision possible. He gathered every ship he had left, 300 vessels, 10,000 men, and launched a full invasion of Curonia. It was supposed to be a massacre, a lesson, burn their lands to ash. The Swedish fleet sailed east looking like an unstoppable force. Priests blessed the sails, wives waved from the docks. It felt like the good old days. Except there was one tiny problem. Spies. See, Sweden's capital was an international trading city. Russians, Germans, Wends walked the streets, and some of those merchants were watching, counting ships, noting the departure date. While the Swedish fleet sailed east looking for a fight, a small, fast ship left Sweden going the opposite direction, carrying a simple message to Curonia. The nest is empty. The wolf has left her cubs undefended. The Swedes sailed straight into a trap, but not the trap they expected. They found Curonia's coast completely deserted, villages empty, livestock gone, wells poisoned. Confused, the Swedish generals ordered their men into the forests to find the enemy. The instant 10,000 Vikings disappeared into the trees, the real attack began. 300 kilometers away, across the Baltic, a massive fleet of dark sails emerged from the fog. They weren't going to fight the Swedish army. They were going for the heart, for Sweden itself, for the capital city. Dawn, Lake Mälaren, Sweden. Usually peaceful, quiet, safe. But that morning, the mist broke with the sound of 1,000 oars striking water in perfect rhythm. The Curonians and Oeselians had crossed the Baltic and arrived at Sweden's doorstep. And the capital, Sigtuna, was defended by old men and boys. The wooden barriers protecting the harbor? Useless. The Baltic ship's shallow draft let them slide right over. There was no negotiation, no warning, just fire. The city guard ran to the walls. What they saw froze their blood. Not a disciplined army, a tide, a flood of warriors pouring from ships before they even touched sand. They wore light leather, not heavy mail. They carried short axes. They were fast. The main gate fell in 15 minutes. The massacre reached the cathedral. Archbishop Johannes, Sweden's most sacred Christian figure, took refuge at the altar with women and children. They believed church walls would protect them, that even barbarians respected God's house. They were wrong. The raiders battered down the cathedral's oak doors. When they entered, they didn't stop at the cross. The archbishop was beheaded right there on the altar steps. His blood stained the holy ornaments. But the ultimate insult? The raiders didn't just steal treasure. They dismantled the cathedral's magnificent bronze doors, masterpieces of Swedish craftsmanship, and loaded them onto their ships. They took Sweden's pride. Sigtuna burned so intensely, the smoke darkened the sun 20 kilometers away. The Pax Suecica, the peace enforced by Viking power, was over. The hunters had become the prey. Across the Baltic, King Canute was still hunting ghosts in Curonian forests. His army was exhausted, starving, lost. They'd been marching in circles for days. Every night, sentries vanished. No screams, just empty helmets found on the moss. The psychological warfare was destroying the most feared army in Scandinavia. Finally, Canute ordered retreat. But when his army reached the beach where they'd left 300 ships, the king's heart stopped. 50 ships were burning. A Curonian raiding force had waited for the main army to leave, then slaughtered the guards and torched the fleet. And then a fishing boat arrived from Sweden. The messenger fell at Canute's feet, face covered in soot. "The archbishop is dead. They took the doors. Sigtuna is gone." 10,000 hardened warriors stood in silence. They hadn't been defeated by superior force. They'd been outsmarted. They'd left the door open, and the wolf had come inside. But the nightmare wasn't over, because the journey home across the Baltic would be a hunt. The Baltic Sea is full of islands, narrow channels, hidden rocks. For expert navigators, it's heaven. For a broken fleet with traumatized crews, it's a maze of death. The Curonians knew the Swedes would try to flee home, and they were waiting. The Swedish fleet sailed in tight formation, like frightened animals huddling together. But there are no shield walls at sea. Fog rose, and through the mist came small, fast ships painted gray and blue to blend with the water. They didn't try to board the heavy Swedish vessels. That's suicide. Instead, they used fire. They buzzed close and hurled clay pots filled with boiling fat and burning pitch, not at the men, at the sails. In minutes, panic seized the Swedish formation. A ship without sails is a floating coffin. Fire at sea is every sailor's nightmare. There's nowhere to run. You choose between burning or drowning. King Knut watched from his flagship as his own ships burned. He had to make the coldest decision of his life. Keep sailing, leave the wounded behind. The screams of his men begging for help faded into the fog. When the Swedish coast finally appeared, there were no cheers. They could smell Sigtuna before they saw it. Burnt wood, rotting flesh. The city was gutted. The docks were ash. The silence was absolute. Knut walked through the ruins. His boots raised clouds of black dust with every step. He reached the cathedral, where bronze doors once stood. There was only darkness and flies. Survivors gathered around their king, but they didn't look at him with reverence. They looked at him with doubt. A king who can't protect his home isn't a king. He's just a man with a fancy hat. Knut removed his helmet and let it fall. He knew the Baltic would never be Swedish again. But here's the crazy part. The Baltic tribes didn't stop. Victory made them hungry. They realized that united, they were unstoppable. They looked south toward new enemies, toward the Teutonic Knights. These weren't Vikings. These were German warrior monks, crusaders, men who fought for God, not gold. Men who had no fear of death because they believed they held the key to paradise. The tribes tried their old tactics, quick raids, fire and retreat. It didn't work. The Germans built stone fortresses, used crossbows that could kill from 100 paces, and they deployed heavy cavalry, knights in full armor on giant war horses. When that cavalry charged, the ground shook. It was like fighting a wall of steel moving at 40 kilometers per hour. The Baltic warriors panicked. Their speed was useless if they couldn't get close. But humans adapt. The tribes learned. They united under a warlord named Mindaugas. They stopped fighting in open fields and took the war to the ice. Winter 1236. The Germans marched through frozen swamps, confident their armor made them invincible. The Baltic warriors lured them onto thin ice. When 500 knights charged, the ice cracked. 600-kilo horses and men in 40 kilos of steel punched through the frozen surface into the swamp below. The warriors attacked with hooks, dragging knights into the water. The weight of their own armor drowned them. The Teutonic Order lost 150 elite knights in one afternoon. Their power was broken. And from that victory, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was born. The only pagan empire that looked Christianity in the eye and didn't blink. They became the largest state in Europe, stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, all because a bunch of primitive tribesmen refused to be victims. So, here's the truth they don't teach in school. The Vikings weren't gods. They weren't invincible. They were raiders who got really good at bullying weaker targets. But when they met people who refused to be afraid, who learned their tactics, who fought smarter instead of harder, the Vikings died screaming. The Baltic tribes proved something important. It doesn't matter how scary you are. If you underestimate your enemy, if you get arrogant, if you think you're untouchable, someone's going to humble you hard. The Swedish Vikings learned that lesson in burning ships and ruined cities, and history never forgot. The only tribe that terrified the Vikings to death didn't do it with magic or miracles. They did it with intelligence, adaptation, and absolute ruthlessness. They turned the hunters into prey, and the Baltic Sea became a Viking graveyard. Drop a comment. Did you know about the Baltic tribes before this? What other unbeatable empires got destroyed by underdogs? And if you want more stories about history's greatest upsets and forgotten warriors, hit that subscribe button, because the truth is always crazier than the legend. Peace out.